Hello and welcome to Moles of Matrasia, a channel that is fresh and new and is basically just a chance for me to display and explore the world building process I have been going through on my kind of fantasy world. We all know what that, I imagine, we all know what that kind of entails. For example, the most famous J.R. Tolkien's world of Middle-earth and all of those kind of things are built upon worlds created by an author or somebody, usually over long periods of time, and then stories from within that world come about as they do through creative processes. For me, this world is called Matrasia. I've been working on this since I was about 18, and the origin of the world was kind of sentient moles that live under the ground and have worlds and lives and cultures and all these things going on for themselves. It started on, obviously, like most things do, started very minimally with very light ideas. That was just, to be honest, a little bit of fun. So I've always been a doodler. I love to doodle. Rather than paying attention at school, I usually doodling little characters. And that progressed when I was 18, working as a tree surgeon. We took a lot of breaks where I was working, I'll not say where, but as we took those breaks, I kind of found myself looking for something to entertain myself during those periods of time. And sure enough, because I like to doodle, that's exactly what I did. And that developed over time into a story, which developed into a book, which I then did several drafts of. But then that story was within a world that constantly needed detail. It constantly needed building. And as I was trying to build that world in the stories and things like that, I realised I actually potentially enjoyed more the world building aspect than I did the storytelling, because at the time the storytelling was constantly full of holes, because you're always thinking, what does this look, what does this look like, what's this, and all those sort of things. So why moles? I know, it seems a bit odd, but quite simply, I'll show you this here. This is the remnants of the original notebook I bought when I was 18 to doodle on. And basically, the reason I chose moles can probably be best seen in these little doodles. It was very 2D at the time, and what I enjoyed doing was building these kind of structural tunnels, I suppose. So you got tunnels, lifts going up that led to rooms and different things like that, and it just allowed for making the most use out of a single page. I don't have evidence, but I do believe it originally started when you would get a piece of paper during a lecture. This was when I was training to be a tree surgeon, and due to the writing and things bulking out the page and taking up the space, what I wanted to do was create these structures on the page in which I could draw little characters and figures. And it just turned out that I guess eventually I started doing tunnels, and I thought, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit because I don't actually remember exactly how it came about, but basically the figures, the moles, as you can kind of see, although this was very basic drawing at the time, they just suited this world underground, and they just had these little noses, little pointed noses. The body shapes were easy to draw. And then around that, I could give them all kinds of outfits and purposes. This was kind of a good one here. That was kind of just like a marketplace, and it was constantly thinking, how would this work? Where would the doors come from? Where would the bridges work? And all these kind of different aspects. And as you can see, the original has kind of fallen to pieces, and this was the sort of what I was thinking when I was drawing the mole figures, and as you can see, there's also different other races that take part in these stories, as well, that live on the world of Matrasia. And yeah, that was how it started originally. And if I give you an example of where it's progressed to, so I'll show you sort of one of the latest comic strips that I've done. So yeah, originally you were looking at things like this, and then you're on to, you know, more detail, different angles, more 3D worlds, just a lot of experimenting still, and that kind of thing. But yeah, over time, obviously things have progressed, and on and off over the years. So it's not always been constantly working on this. But you know, I've been through different stages and phases. I moved away from the idea of tunnels and that 2D element of the drawing, in order to better manifest the world in my mind when I was writing, because it was very hard when I was writing the book to actually imagine a world that was just all tunnels, because it was just in the descriptive element of it. It was like, oh, and he looked forward and the view was amazing of more tunnels and all this kind of thing. So it had to evolve away from tunnels, which is where the real world building began. And you know, there was various elements. So I was thinking to myself, what does light look like down there? This is all obviously underground, very deep in the surface of this world, Matrasia. The surface of this world, there are maps, there are ideas, but it's not very well fleshed out, because it's kind of always focused on this mole culture living under the ground. But I rather than having fire down there was, not that fire can't exist down there, but I came up with the idea of crystals, a certain type of crystal, the light, which then became the religion of these moles. That was an idea that stems back right to the beginning. I'll try and find you just an easy example of that. And yeah, this crystal would basically act like the sun does. So with the idea being, as the sun on the surface moved across the sky, the brightness of these crystals, would increase, and it would act to this subterranean world much like the sun does above. It would provide nutrition for plants and animals and life and all of those sort of things. So then it became, right, well, rather than tunnels, what can we have instead? And instead of tunnels, I came up with the idea of having caverns, grand, big, ginormous caverns with huge land masses within them, connected by tunnels. And then each of these caverns would have an element of different cultures within them, maybe a different clan to each of the different caverns, and all of this kind of. I'm trying to find you a good picture of the light. Well, basically, so here is a priest of the light, the bearers of burdens, the light priests. So the Order of Light became a religion underground, and then I'll show you this preliminary, but this is quite an accurate map to how the world looks now, although it is in pencil, so it's not very clear. I need to really flesh these out, to be honest. It's just where my focus is at the moment. Yeah, so this is the world we ended up building. So as you can see, these are underground. If you imagine you're looking beneath the surface of the world, you've got these ginormous caverns under here, open areas beneath the world, and they are connected by huge tunnels. I do believe when I flesh this out, the distance between the caverns will be increased. I've always struggled a little bit with working out the distance between the caverns because the caverns are so ginormous. But anyone who's ever tried to write stories in which time frames need to take place will understand the difficulties where that comes into place. Your character has to travel from A to B. How long does it take? And how far is that distance? What's the type of travelling they're doing? So those tunnels that connect the caverns, obviously, the they're called in this world. They're called the Great Tunnels. There is a Shapers Guild, and a very big part of the mole culture is the Shapers, and they're tasked with maintaining and these ginormous, amazing tunnels, which provide a very smooth path from one place to another. And yeah, so anyway, that's another. There's plenty of areas that need fleshing out, but I'm just here to sort of share with you where we're at in a kind of overall scope of things and how this looks. There's also, there's plenty of other tunnels other than these great tunnels, and they get less and less refined. Lining the walls of these tunnels would be crystals, which have been sort of mined and shaped by the Shapers. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. So within the caverns themselves, if you imagine you had, perhaps it's a really flat land in the cavern, and then the walls would go up and you would have this stone. Anyone who's been inside a huge cave, imagine it just at that, but on a ginormous scale. There is a reason these exist, and perhaps I'll go into that in a little bit. But yeah, the idea being that the crystals, there's huge, ginormous ones at the sort of heart of these caverns, different shapes, and one of them is actually comes all in the cavern of Moderic. There is a crystal that comes all the way from the roof to the floor in a giant column, and that in that particular one, they've actually their main city is within that crystal itself, and that particular clan of moles is very attuned to the light because of their proximity to it and things like that. So they worship this light, the moles, and there's good reason to, because within this world, that crystal is actually, its origin is divine in a sense. It's actually the remnants of a god that sort of gave life to Matrasia in a boundless universe of infinite different worlds and scopes and different realities and all those sort of things that usually come along with it. Matrasia is a world of its own, and it had a particularly important role within the formation of the universe, and actually led to a war between the gods, and it is protected by this god that's body, I mean, it was remnants. The god, sorry, I do have a little puppy behind me and she might bark every so often. So yeah, you've got all these different caverns, and so an example of the cavern as a kind of original map, a very clumsy map, very sort of first attempt years ago at colouring, doing different mountainscapes and things like that. So if you imagine this line, it's a vague representation of where the floor really evolves into the walls, and then the roof of the cavern. The crystal isn't on this map, but you can imagine it being around here, with tunnels leading away from the cavern. But for each one of those on the map that I showed you before, there is a drawing. So this was for example, this was the prototype drawing of a cavern called Vussel. And this was the more detailed version of that. You can see, I don't know if you can see it very well, because as you probably noticed, I tried to put it through a laminator to protect it, and unfortunately it's kind of destroyed it. Not the end of the world, it can be redone, but for the moment this is quite useful as a tool, because the story I'm building at the moment takes place primarily in this cavern, so for reference I still find it useful to keep this. But as you can see, the detail is a lot more intense. There's named locations and sort of different regions and mountainscapes and things like that. So in here is sort of, I don't know, a lot of it's in pencil, but in here is more or less a prototype for each one of the caverns. And so they have their own detail, their own cultures, their own stories. Each cavern is a home to a clan. There is try and get this out of the way a little bit and keep this smooth. There's a central cavern called Molvatar, and from the history of the moles, it's a very old history. They were originally slaves to a race on the surface, and they were forced to dig, and they discovered these caverns, which actually had an original inhabitant, a worm-like sentient creature that they gradually killed off and as they took over these lands. But they were a lot less intelligent when they were slaves in a slave form, and there was kind of the first age on Matrasia anyway. There was wars, and basically the race that was enslaving these moles was overthrown, almost driven to extinction. And in that, the moles were left to their own devices. They chose to live in these caverns. They started from this one here, and then as they dug out and explored the age of exploration, they found other caverns, and then the ancestors of those caverns started their own clans. Each cavern, because of its different environments, create different cultures and different clans eventually, which brings us to the modern world. It's all very, as ever with anything, the world building element, it's very complicated, but I've answered a lot of questions within my own head when building these, so it's important that it exists this way in a way. So originally the story that I've written the books on was taking place here, and it took place in about 30 years in the future from when this particular story took place. I'm now working back since I got these bits of art stuff for Christmas. This is called the Vussel Clan Rebellion, and it's got it's got a big place in the story. So these are quite specific times and place of the history of this world, and they take place in that. So, however, like I said earlier, you do a lot of this world building as a result of trying to create a story, and it's quite fun world building because you're always asking different questions. What would things look like? How do things work? Why do they do this? What does this mean? And as you're going along, you answer these questions. And in here, this is more of a kind of itinerary itinerary for my own sake. So here you have the mole race, kind of a very brief explanation of them. Their ancestors would be, moles as we know them, a bit like human ancestors were apes, and further back was X, Y, and Z. But the divine part of this world is what dictates what kind of got the sentience of these races, and the reason there's quite a few different races that have sentience on Matrasia, and they're usually as well known as foxes, as rabbits, as badgers. There's weasels, as stoats, and those sort of things. The reason they were chosen was because this god here, as it's explained in this very long-winded story, which I'm not going to go through entirely, but I will show you this page. So that this is the kind of pantheon of gods. This is the ultimate, undefinable, the very beginning of all things. Below that is a pantheon of gods, a pantheon crown, and then below that is a lesser pantheon of crowns. This god mentioned at the start here was one of the lesser ones, but had a very important task. Her job was to seed potential across the universe, which allowed for the gradual manifestation of sentience within races, but also would be, these seeds that she would place, it might only dictate that this race would be would have a very minor role, this would have a minor role, this might only become like, a generic frog, things like that. That's how in this world life was, at least according to the scholars of this world, because obviously, as we know today, there's a lot of different versions of how people look at their gods and all these kind of things, but as they see it, they're the god of the god who of Matrasia, Astris, the goddess of life and light, has an opposite. All gods in this world, apart from the sort of head of the crown, which is balance, all gods have an opposite. So when Astris was created, this one here, her brother was created at the same time. Those two act in balance. So she's the god of light and life, and he is the god of death and darkness and corruption and things like that. Now, that's not to say one's evil and one isn't necessarily. It's just that you have two types of gods. You've got the adheres and the avails. The avails were purposely created out of love, and then the adheres were created as a result of the creation of the avails. So they're opposite, and they bring balance to each other. So Astris, the god of light and life, she spent endless eons seeding life as according to the instructions of the ultimate and the crown pantheon, who instructed her in the way and she would plant these seeds. These seeds hold a small essence of the ultimate within them, and all the potential that that seed has within it is from that, the ultimate. And so Astris did this for eons, and she was very proud to do that job, but she did kind of become sad when many of the smaller, more humble creatures never received the highest potential seeds. It always seemed to be a very similar pattern in a lot of different worlds. Often only one of the creatures within that world were given the seed of highest potential. And although she respected the will of the ultimate and the crown pantheon, she did become sad because she saw all of what she loved, these smaller, more beautiful little creatures, never really getting the full attention that some of the other ones did in countless different worlds and universes and things like that. Again, this is from the perspective of scholars within Matrasia, so it's something much more intricate than that, but it's something along the lines of evolution, really, but it explains to them the world they live in which so many different of the smaller creatures have this sentience. Because as Astris worked, a god called Malchus the architect, this guy here, he was a builder of things. He builds world. He builds the kind of vessels in which the seeds would go. Now, that, like with evolution in a sense, obviously not because we're talking fantasy world here, but whatever. Within that, those seeds will be planted very, very early on, but he would sort of have designed the template for where those seeds could reach and how far they would go. So here you've got a bit of an example. He's got a dinosaur. He's designing things. He's building things. He falls in love with Astris anyway and sees her sadness, and so builds her a world of her own called Matrasia. This is Matrasia here. He spends a long time building her this world. He presents this world to Astris and gives her access to his vast library of all the different creatures and things that she has seeded in different worlds and different places over the millennia and eons of time, and promises her full access to take whatever of vessels she would like, put them in her world, populate her world, and if she needs only to seed them. Now, of course, she was given these seeds, and that she was given instructions where to put them, what to do, but that's such a vast and all-encompassing job that she didn't find it particularly difficult to hoard some of the seeds to herself. So she carried on a job, but she kept a few to the side, especially the high potential seeds, so that she would, when the time was right, be able to seed her world. And she, we talk here about watching her brother corrupt the life that she saw grow. She knew death was very important for life. It was part of the balance of the two things. But at the same time, the corrupting element, he fed off the light that she planted, and it always made her quite sad. She then looked for a solution to hide her world, because once she planted the seeds of life within her world, her brother would have become aware of its existence, and no doubt with the sheer amount of potential she had planted within that world, far greater than was ever normal, he would be driven to an insatiable hunger. And she was aware of this, and she was aware she'd have to confront this eventually, but initially she wanted to make sure she could plant these seeds without disturbance. So she did a couple of things. She found the god of deception and asked him if she was to pay with some seeds, and give him some seeds, her some seeds, sorry. I think she's generally referred to as a she, is the god of deception as well. Would that god then deceive the rest of the universe to Matrasia's existence? Perhaps the rest of the universe, other gods could have been aware, but she's not so bothered about that. More from her brother. Hide Matrasia from her brother. Deception agreed, And Malchus, the architect, as we said before, warned her of the folly of this, because deception's name is deception, so can't be trusted, needless to say. But Astris knew this, and she had also been taking some seeds to consume and placing them within her own body. This was so that when the time came that she had to confront her brother, she would be prepared. So she planted the seeds on a world of Matrasia, and it was full of life. The diversity of different life and the potential that life had was so great, so enormous, that it was glowing through the ether of the universe, and it was nearly impossible for deception to hide it. But she tried her best, soon got bored, and needless to say, found Vaux, who is Astris' brother, and let him know about Matrasia. She was fed up of doing that job. She didn't want to do it anyway. She just wanted the seeds originally. But Astris knew this would happen all along. So, needless to say, her brother then comes to confront her, and there is a big battle. Bash, bash, bash. Big battle. Vaux is very surprised because Astris is a more peaceful god, whereas Vaux he's more typical towards the more aggressive style of life, and very surprised to be overpowered by his sister, who leaves him beaten and battered. But the moment before, Astris doesn't want to destroy her brother because she knows that death's important to life, but she wants to dictate the terms of his relationship with Matrasia to protect it. But the moment before she forces that upon him, from the ether come restraints which capture and hold her in place, and that is from the god called Retraction, which is one of the Crown Pantheon, one of the most powerful, sent by the Crown Pantheon to put an end to what has really been a defiance of the laws of the universe to this point. I mean, there's no physical world really at this point. It's very much an ethereal plane. It's hard to really. This is very much a scholar in a modern world that is only so scientific, not really very scientific. So they haven't really got that kind of perspective to put on the world. So this explains it to them anyway. So she is captured. Her brother, who's nearly completely out of existence, has been battered and beaten, is given the chance to absorb the light within her. So he drains her of light. You can see this nearly kills her. It doesn't quite. He drains her of life, and then as punishment, she is forced to watch as he drains Matrasia, her love, the thing that she loves more than anything else, and the thing that she's given everything to. And you can see kind of represented there. He's pulling seeds out, seeds of potential that she'd planted. So the diversity that was going to be on Matrasia is dramatically reduced. It's still a very when eventually, we see to the modern day, it's still a very diverse world compared to what you would normally see in terms of sentient races. But at the same time, it was dramatically reduced. Vaux became very powerful, and as this process was ongoing, the head of the Crown Pantheon, the only one without an opposite, is observing while listening to the ultimate, the only one who can really interpret the ultimate's will. Also, it is believed. And he's watching at the point where the balance shifts so far, because the whole thing's massively out of balance, and that's basically why the Crown Pantheon have intervened, because it's too out of balance. It defies the fundamental laws of existence as they see it. And at the moment it gets back to where it's balanced before it can keep going, because Vaux would just consume it all and become far too powerful, and you'd have the same problem just with a different god. At that moment, as the Crown Pantheon were aware would happen, Astris is unable to cope anymore. She sacrifices herself, she implodes, and her essence is scattered across Matrasia, as it shows here. That essence floods the land, seeps deep into the soil, and Matrasia is then protected. She has more or less died. She still exists in a form, but in her divine form is being destroyed. But that sacrifice has protected what is left of Matrasia, and that's where the deeps are created. That's where this world, the underground world, is created, because of the sort of the power of those. Of her essence as it seeps down over many thousands and millions of years. It kind of burns out these great craters beneath the earth, and that's where her lingering essence is solidified as crystals, and it's left huge cavities in the earth, and they become the caverns we explained earlier. Yeah, and that's kind of what led to, so that's Vaux after that. He's the one who initiates the war against the gods after this, because he challenges them for allowing her to do this, and then this leads to a situation where the gods are removed, like the mortal plane is separated from the divine plane, and many more rules are put in place. So underlying all that will be in the modern world after the war, once he and his army is defeated and cast away, it becomes his duty, he becomes his purpose. He's driven insane by that taste of Matrasia he had, and the power he almost had, that kind of endless glut of life that existed there. It becomes his purpose to find his way into Matrasia and corrupt the essence of his sister from within it, so that he may break through that barrier between the worlds and consume it entirely. And he believes with that strength he can overthrow the crown pantheon and reshape the formation of the gods, because he firmly doesn't believe that he believes the crown pantheon become corrupt. You've got the head of the crown pantheon says he's the only one who can listen to, I'm saying he's not he, whatever, he's the only one who can interpret the ultimate's will, and he doesn't believe that. Vaux's mission in his existence now is to corrupt everything, and he sees that actually as bringing about an inevitable basically rebirth of the universe into a kind of whole new existence. And so he's not necessarily evil in a way, although a lot of what comes from him and the demons and the demigods and the things that come from him, he has legions of all of these things, and he's forever manifesting in small ways in Matrasia, because he can corrupt. So he can just about get through and corrupt people in their dreams. He can corrupt, if people take great actions of corruption themselves and corrupt their souls, it gives him sort of a bit of a doorway in. So he's forever trying to get into Matrasia, and he's there's all these, there's demons in Matrasia. There's all sorts of things, and they often come from him. And one day he hopes to break through the barrier and corrupt his sister's remnants in essence and consume it, and then make that final step to kind of ascending his current godhood. Anyway, that's the grand scope of things, and it's still got a lot of fleshing out to do, as there always is. And like I say, that's always from the perspective of a scholar within Matrasia. So it's not true, and it is true in a way. It's their way of telling the story of what's going on. Anyway, so this, for example, this Vussel Clan rebellion, which is a very specific time and event. This is compared to that grand, all-encompassing story, this is a very small story of a particular emperor who wants to open the deeps to trade to the surface, and is having a lot of trouble because there are factions within the deeps that don't want that to happen, as you can imagine today in our world. So this is his story, and he's been trying to convince people to the value of opening up themselves, whereas another faction, the Vussel faction, which I say is that cavern, they don't want this to happen, and while they say it's about protecting what the deeps is and all these kind of things, behind them is the discovery of a broken sword years ago behind the Vussel clan leadership. He's called Byron Oathbreaker. He basically discovered this broken sword through a dream, that corrupting element. He found this broken sword like an actual artifact that really gives Vaux a little bit of a entrance into this world, and he killed the current monarchy within Vussel. So that it is an empire under the ground, and they have an emperor, but the emperor is dependent on all the clans as much as he is on his own clan of Molvatar which is, I'm not going to go into it now, but it's basically, the emperor isn't all powerful. The emperor has a senate, he's answerable to the rest. He is very powerful, but if you can't just go, and like when this monarch was killed in this cavern, he didn't have the power to really stop that from happening before it was too late. Anyway, so Byron Oathbreaker has long been in charge now with his 3 sons in Vussel, and that's where this story is taking place. And just as a small element here, there is within this story, there's a cult called the Kunrata cult in Vussel, and they are actually telling the story that the light is a false god, and that the real and the truth and the rightful god is Vorks, which to some degree is true. In there, and so they're not lying, and they've got a different perspective. And as you can see here, this is them, and that's like a demon that they're listening to. That's like sort of the antagonist, I suppose, in this story. And as you can see here, this is how these kind of work. This is like the latest page. It usually goes through pencil, then pen, then colour. And yeah, that's a very, very brief overview to what is an extremely, come here, you. Hang on, I'm just going to get my dog to say hi at the end of this video. Come on. So this is Sooty. We're going to go for a walk after this. So yeah, that's an overview of the world of Matrasia. So this channel is Moles of Matrasia. I want to do a lot of little short videos, little fun little animations. I just want to play around with it. I'd say this is all a lot of fun for me. It's all hobby. But I thought maybe for those who were interested, this long form video would maybe give a bit of an insight into what's actually going on here. What do you mean moles? But yeah, moles of Matrasia. Not moles as you and I would think of as moles, but if moles were to evolve as far as humans evolved from, smaller monkeys back in our real far back ancestry, that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of these moles. Anyway, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you very much. Please subscribe and like and all those things. I'm only saying that because I can't imagine many people making it this far in the video. But if you have, well bloody done. I don't know how long it has been. And from me and Sooty, we'll see you next time.